When you're considering leaving the law enforcement profession, but feel uncertain or unsure about the real steps you should take, or if you're even making the right decision. Well, today I'm going to talk about my experience leaving law enforcement after nearly a decade of service and all the obstacles and challenges I faced during that transition so it can hopefully help you during your own transition from the thin blue line to the private sector. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 23 of the Recruiting Hero Show. I am your host, Colin Whittington. I'm also the CEO and founder of Recruiting Heroes, LLC, a national employment agency dedicated to helping America's law enforcement officers and military veterans transition from a life of service to the private sector. I'm so excited and honored to have you all here today. I will say I am fighting a pretty nasty cold, so I do apologize if I sound a little off. But I was so excited to do this episode today to talk about my experience leaving law enforcement. I'm sure a lot of you are in a similar position right now where you're considering possibly moving on from law enforcement to the private sector. And I know that decision is a monumental one, and it's one I struggled with for a long time. So I figured it'd be a good opportunity today to talk about that process and what you're going through and the steps you can take to really be successful in that process. As always, I do hope that you'll like this video, subscribe to the channel as well, and comment below if you are thinking about leaving law enforcement. Share your story, where you're trying to go, where you've been. I'd love to hear from you and have a good dialogue with you. As always, I'm giving away our Heroes Job Search Guide. This guide is fantastic for any law enforcement officer considering transitioning to the private sector. I give a lot of tips and resources in this guide, including my professional resume template, how to write a resume, how to optimize your LinkedIn profile, and so much more. It's completely for free, so just check it out. I'll put the link down below. It's also on my website, which is recruitingheroesllc.com. But let's get into my story really quickly. So I was a deputy sheriff for the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, which is in Northern Virginia. We're about 40 minutes from Washington, D.C. or so. Loudoun County is a pretty diverse and wealthy county. It's about close to about almost a little under 500,000 citizens, a mixture of rural and urban, and it's one of the wealthiest counties in the whole country. So they have a sheriff's office there, a full service sheriff's office. There's no police department. It's just the sheriff's office. So I was hired in 2015 as a patrol deputy, and I worked throughout Loudoun County, mostly day shift, a little night shift as well. I then moved on to community policing, which was a lot of fun. If anyone's been a community policing officer, I hope you had a good time with it. I love that role. It was great. A lot of time to interact with the community, to run some traffic, to make some cool arrests, and a whole number of other things. So for me, being a CR or community resource deputy was awesome. I was then asked by the sheriff to be his public information officer. It was a role I never really expected I would have in my career, and not really one I had thought I would want to do. And it was a challenging role, I will say. I learned a lot, and I attribute a lot of my current success to having been in that role. But I was in charge of running the social media for the whole agency, interacting with the media, putting out press releases, responding to critical incidents as the media liaison for the agency. And it was a good experience. I really did enjoy it. It wasn't my favorite role in the agency in law enforcement, but it was one that I think has benefited me the most, or one of the most, after in my career after law enforcement. In 2019, I was named the Deputy Sheriff of the Year for the whole state of Virginia, which was a pretty cool honor. There's probably around 10,000 deputies in Virginia, so being named the Deputy of the Year for the whole state was pretty awesome. Got letters from the governor, from senators. I got an award ceremony, so that was all a really cool experience. Shortly after that, I was promoted to sergeant and put in charge of our background investigation and recruiting unit. So I was a sergeant, which was the highest ranking position for the background investigation unit. So I oversaw everything that has to do with recruiting candidates, doing the background investigation, and then hiring them. The agency is around 900 employees, between 700 sworn and 200 civilian staff members. So it was a pretty large agency, and we did a lot of hiring. We probably hired around 80 to 100 people every single year. So it was a really cool role, and that's where I really fell in love with recruiting, and it kind of inspired me to start this career after law enforcement as well. And I only served for about 7.5 years before I decided to leave. And that's something I'm seeing so often now, that most candidates that I work with, in Recruiting Heroes, they're ones that are, mid-career officers. I help a lot of people who are retiring as well, of course, but it's shocking to me about at least half, if not 60% of the candidates I work with are those that are in between 5 to 12 years of service. So if that's something, if that's where you are currently and you're considering leaving, know that you're not alone. It's definitely something that's very common right now, and it's sad to see because I think the profession is doing a lot of things wrong when it comes to retaining their officers, whether it be toxic leadership, lack of career growth opportunities, financial considerations. There's so much that the law enforcement is just really struggling with. And my next book's coming out March 31st of 2025, and it's called The Thinning Blue Line, and it's all about helping the law enforcement vacancy crisis through retention, which I say is more important than recruitment, but I do also cover recruitment in there pretty extensively as well. But for me, I was hitting about 7-year mark when I started realizing that my heart was no longer fully in law enforcement. There's a lot of frustrations in the job. Obviously, the long hours, we all know about that, working, nights, weekends, holidays. Law enforcement, and I think really any government job, it really has, it's kind of a weird place where you kind of get rewarded with more work the better you do. So high performers are the ones getting piled on with more and more work for them, while people are just skating by are just given the minimal amount of work. And it's nice to know that the agency trusts you and wants you to take on extra responsibilities, but at the same time, you're getting the same pay as the person next to you who might not be doing anything. And that was kind of my experience. I was taking on more and more responsibilities, and looking back now, I still have a lot of friends at the agency, and I still love the agency and the leadership team. But looking at it now, the job that I was doing at the time, when I was leaving, is now being done by 4 different deputies. Well, actually, 2 deputies, a sergeant, and a lieutenant. Because I was in charge of the recruiting unit. I was also helping part time as the PIO. I was doing onboarding, so training as well, and then numerous other duties in addition to those. So it was something where the better I did, I was kept getting more and more work, and I was getting just burnt out. I'll be honest with you. I was in a severe career burnout, and I just no longer felt that passion anymore. And it's a shame because I do think if my workload had been managed a little bit better, both on my own part as well as those of my leadership team, I might still be in law enforcement. And I did feel a lot of frustrations as well, especially in the recruiting background unit, where I wanted to implement new procedures and policies that would really help drive our recruiting efforts. But the leadership team, being a little older generation, they had a hard time adjusting to the new world. We're trying to recruit millennials and Gen Zers, and they need a whole different kind of approach than what was needed in the 90s and early 2000s. And I think my leadership team wasn't fully prepared for that. So that was a lot of frustrations that I felt too. The financial part was absolutely a topic for me too. I got hired and promoted at a very weird time when our agency was doing, pay studies and adjusting our salary scales and things like that, which are all great for the long term. Our officers are now getting paid a whole lot better than they were when I first started. But I had gotten promoted at a really odd time where we fell in a weird little channel almost. And for whatever reason, we weren't given the same raise. The people who were promoted with me weren't given the same raises as the ones who were promoted before, or even the ones who were promoted later. So it was pretty bizarre. And I remember doing a background investigation on a candidate that we were, and eventually ended up hiring a really nice young guy. Did 4 years in the Navy, I think, as a cook. Had a college degree and spoke Spanish. So those are all things obviously my agency valued, and we were able to recruit him and hire him. But he had never been a law enforcement officer a day in his life, and I had served for 7.5 years. I was a sergeant. I had been named deputy of the year. I had my own bachelor's degree. But this young man came in as a brand new rookie officer, making more money than I was as a 7.5 year long veteran and supervisor in the agency. And that really hit pretty hard. It's not, definitely didn't get into the law enforcement profession for money. But at the same time, it's kind of, you do feel a lack of value when you start seeing people who are brand new to the profession getting paid more than you. Again, I was supervising the entire hiring unit, and a brand new rookie officer comes in making more than the supervisor. It's definitely not something that sat well with me. And that's kind of where I think I first really started feeling frustration. Before that, it was a little bit like uncertainty about my opinion about law enforcement and if I wanted to continue. But then really the frustration started building. And that was a part that really drove me to consider leaving law enforcement. And, I started addressing some of these concerns with my leadership team, with HR, especially around the salary part of it, and saying, hey, listen, my situation is very unique. I know you can't help everybody, but look at this. Like, this is where I am, and this is a brand new person making more than me. And I really felt like I was ignored. It was a shame. It really wasn't really ever really addressed. And that just, didn't sit well with me. And that was a major push towards me leaving law enforcement. I was then recruited out of law enforcement. A tech company actually reached out to me saying they had seen the efforts I had done to help recruiting in law enforcement, and they wanted me to take over their recruiting unit in a tech company in Northern Virginia. So I went there, and the rest is kind of history. I've told that story numerous times about my transition from law enforcement to the private sector, and then from a company employee to starting my own business. And it's been really amazing. And now what I do is help law enforcement officers with their own career transition. I don't try to convince anybody to leave law enforcement. That has to be your decision. No one can tell you to stay. No one can tell you to leave. It has to be your decision, maybe with a few close friends and family as well. But when someone has decided that they want to leave law enforcement, what I try to do is make that process as easy as possible for them. Because this job market right now is absolutely crap. I'll be honest with you. It's incredibly competitive. Companies are treating their candidates pretty poorly. A lot of ghosting, a lot of no responses from companies. Candidates having to apply to over 100 roles before they even get an interview. A lot of candidates spending 18 months looking for a job. And that's something I don't want to see from our law enforcement officers who have served their communities so bravely and so well, for decades, maybe even. I want them to have that successful transition. So what we recommend is a numerous 6-step process, really. It starts with finding out what your identity is and what you want to do after law enforcement, all the way to finding your dream job. And that's what we do in our processes when you work with Recruiting Heroes. We help you identify careers that interest you. We then help you rebrand your entire, candidate application packet. So that means your resume, your LinkedIn, your interview training. There's so much we go through to make sure that you are a great fit. Because that's what you want to make sure you do. You want to find a job that aligns with your interests first and foremost. Because if you leave law enforcement, which is such an identity defining career, and you go to something that doesn't really fulfill you and bring you passion, you're going to feel pretty miserable, and you're going to miss law enforcement more than you would if you went to something that really inspired you. We also want to make sure that you're paid well, because you have so much experience that is really valuable in the private sector. We want to make sure that you're paid well for that. And to get there, you really have to have a set process and procedures. And what I see so often is law enforcement officers not really following a set process, and also starting the process way too late, where all of a sudden now they're scrambling to try to find a job instead of taking 6 months, even 2 to 3 years ahead of time, planning about how to make that transition possible. So that's one of the main reasons why I started this channel, is to try to get the word out there to you law enforcement officers. Start thinking about the next chapter of your career as soon as possible. Even if you have 5 years left, start at least thinking about the process. Update your resume, get on LinkedIn, start networking with people. These are all things that will benefit you so much down the road. And of course, still be the fantastic officer that you are. Don't give up, or don't leave. You don't leave anything in the tank. Go full in on your law enforcement career, but on your own time, still also think about what comes next, because those years are going to fly by. And I want to make sure that you can think about the next stage of your career as soon as possible. So I want you to optimize your LinkedIn profile, or create one if you don't have one. It's so important. Recruiters are spending more time on LinkedIn than they are looking at your resumes. So have your LinkedIn squared away. Optimize your resume as well. A lot of cops suck at writing resumes. So if you need help, reach out to me. I love writing resumes for law enforcement officers. So reach out anytime. And then really start networking as well, and do research on the companies that you want to go after. If you start seeing that the industry you're interested in, they're all looking for these certain certifications or trainings, spend the next couple of months or years working towards those trainings. That way, when you come out of law enforcement, you really are ready to go. Because that's something I didn't do. I didn't do a whole lot of trainings or certs before going into the private sector. And it probably held me back a little bit. And I've had to kind of play catch up in the years since. So I want you to be proactive with that and get ahead of the game. But that's a little bit about my story about why I left law enforcement. I can talk about this for hours, but I know you all have your individual stories as well. If you're considering leaving law enforcement, comment below. Don't have to share your name, just say what you're thinking about, where you're trying to go, what's making you decide to leave law enforcement, because that's a huge topic now as well. We need to figure out what is driving these young officers to leave. And I think it's going to be a pretty common themes that we'll see, poor leadership, lack of career growth, financial limitations, and a number of other things. And we as a law enforcement profession need to do better to make sure our officers feel valued, and that they feel that they have long-term career growth opportunities. So yeah, comment down below. And again, I apologize for being a little sick today, but I did want to spend a few minutes with you all today talking about my career transition. I hope it helps you understand that you are not alone in this process. Transitioning from law enforcement can be absolutely terrifying, but it doesn't have to be. And if you need any help, please reach out to me, reach out to my Recruiting Heroes team. We would love to help you. But again, as always, please like the video, comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all on the next video. Bye, guys.